The water level drops 17 feet below normal pool stage at Norris Lake, Tennessee, and through the murky depths, a church steeple emerges like a drowning hand reaching for salvation. It stands perfectly vertical, its cross still intact after 90 years underwater, marking the grave of Loyston, a town of 1,000 souls that ceased to exist on a Tuesday morning in 1936. As the drought continues, more structures breach the surface: the courthouse steps where marriages were consecrated, the school foundation where children learned to read, the cemetery stones where ancestors should have rested eternally. These aren't ruins destroyed by time, but perfectly preserved architecture, embalmed by reservoir waters that were never supposed to recede this far. The Tennessee Valley Authority's official history celebrates the transformation of a poverty-stricken region into America's economic powerhouse, but beneath 7 lakes spanning 652,000 acres lies evidence of something more troubling: the systematic erasure of entire communities whose removal served purposes that transcend hydroelectric power, in flooded archives that were meant to dissolve, in testimonies from descendants who weren't supposed to remember, in government documents that reveal coordination between agencies that shouldn't have been involved. The truth emerges. The TVA project wasn't just about building dams, it was about drowning history itself. Butler, Tennessee, founded in 1768, stood for 180 years as the heart of Johnson County. On December 1, 1948, TVA officials arrived not with condemnation notices, but with matches. The town burned for 3 days. Every home, every business, every record of its existence turned to ash before the waters of Watauga Lake could claim the remnants. Residents were given 30 days to relocate. Their protests answered with federal marshals and threats of sedition charges. The official narrative speaks of voluntary relocation and generous compensation, but sworn affidavits hidden in private collections tell of midnight evacuations. Families separated and scattered across 5 states to prevent organized resistance, and property deeds that mysteriously vanished from county records. When the lake level dropped in 1983 during reservoir maintenance, investigators found something that shouldn't exist: buildings that weren't on any pre-flood surveys, structures far older and more sophisticated than a frontier town should have possessed, foundations that extended deeper into bedrock than 18th century technology could achieve. The first mystery crystallizes in the selection pattern. The TVA condemned and flooded 15,000 square miles of land, displacing over 1 million people between 1933 and 1951. The official criteria were elevation, watershed management, and flood control. But mapping the drowned towns reveals a different pattern. They cluster around specific geological features that have nothing to do with hydrology. These communities sat atop mineral deposits that weren't commercially valuable, near cave systems that led nowhere profitable, along ley lines that conventional science doesn't recognize. The town of Willow Grove, flooded by Douglas Dam, stood directly above a massive quartz formation that Native American legends claimed sang with the voice of the earth. Big Greasy, submerged beneath Tellico Lake, occupied land the Cherokee called the place where sky touches ground, refusing to build there despite its strategic value. Each drowned community possessed something that made its erasure necessary, something that transcended economic development or electrical generation. The silence surrounding the removals was absolute and enforced. The Knoxville News-Sentinel's archives from 1933-1945 show systematic gaps, entire weeks of newspapers missing, individual pages razor-cut to remove specific articles, photographs chemically bleached to destroy images. Radio station WNOX's broadcast logs indicate 341 technical failures that coincidentally occurred whenever local residents attempted to discuss the relocations on air. Mail carriers reported that letters containing certain phrases, forced removal, military presence, ancient structures, never reached their destinations, returned to sender with no explanation, or simply vanishing. The Federal Communications Commission issued 17 cease and desist orders to amateur radio operators in the Tennessee Valley during this period, all for interference with national defense communications, despite no military installations within hundreds of miles. Suspicion deepens when examining the personnel involved. The TVA's board of directors included experts in hydroelectric engineering, as expected, but classified personnel records reveal additional advisors never mentioned in public documents. Archaeologists specializing in pre-Columbian civilizations, linguists studying dead languages, physicians researching anomalous human physiology, and most surprisingly, theoretical physicists from the Manhattan Project who had no relevance to dam construction. David Lilienthal, TVA's chairman, maintained a secret correspondence with Vannevar Bush about archaeological impediments to national security found in the valley. These letters, declassified accidentally in 1987 before being reclassified, reference artifacts of non-terrestrial origin, and technological remnants predating known civilization that required immediate submersion to prevent proliferation. The launch of investigation through survivors' testimonies reveals consistent anomalies. Residents of flooded towns report identical phenomena in the weeks before evacuation: compass needles spinning wildly, radio signals receiving transmissions in unknown languages, well water turning luminescent at night, and most disturbing, children born with genetic markers that didn't match their parents. Martha Higgins, forced from Loyston at age 7, testified in a 1998 deposition that TVA workers wore radiation badges while surveying her family's farm, instruments that wouldn't be associated with hydroelectric projects. James Butler, descendant of Butler's founding family, possessed photographs showing federal agents removing large metallic objects from beneath the town church, objects that required specialized equipment and were transported in lead-lined vehicles. These testimonies were sealed by federal judges, citing national security. The witnesses placed under lifetime gag orders. The first discovery emerges from underwater archaeology conducted illegally by technical divers in 2003. Beneath Norris Lake in the ruins of Loyston, they found a chamber carved into bedrock beneath the town square. This space, predating the town by unknown centuries, contained symbols that match no known Native American culture, no European tradition, no recorded human language. The walls showed tool marks from implements that left molecular-level smooth surfaces, technology that didn't exist in any era of known human history. Most significant were the acoustic properties. The chamber amplified and modulated sound in ways that violated physics, creating resonances that could be felt in bones miles away. The divers who discovered it reported identical nightmares for months afterward, visions of the valley before human habitation, when things that weren't quite human built structures for purposes that weren't quite comprehensible. The expansion of scope reveals the TVA project connected to a global pattern. Between 1930 and 1960, massive hydroelectric projects flooded ancient sites worldwide. The Aswan High Dam submerged Nubian monuments. The Kariba Dam drowned sacred Tonga territories. The Three Gorges would later flood Chinese archaeological sites. Each project was supervised by advisors from the TVA. Each targeted locations with similar geological and archaeological anomalies. Each resulted in the displacement of populations that possessed problematic genetic markers. According to classified WHO documents, the coordination suggests not independent development projects, but a systematic campaign to submerge evidence of something that predated acknowledged human history, something that threatened the narrative of human development that underpins modern civilization. The clash with established knowledge becomes unavoidable when examining what lies beneath. Ground-penetrating radar reveals structures under every TVA reservoir that shouldn't exist. Geometric complexes too regular for natural formation, metallic deposits arranged in patterns that suggest machinery, void spaces that maintain structural integrity despite millennia of geological pressure. These aren't Native American ruins or early colonial settlements, but something else, something that required the weight of billions of gallons of water to keep suppressed. TVA maintenance records, obtained through FOIA requests, show annual expenditures of $47 million for substrate stabilization, specialized concrete pumped into underwater locations to seal breaches where uncontained materials threaten to escape. The chemical composition of this concrete includes elements that don't appear on the periodic table, compounds that can only be created in particle accelerators that didn't exist when the formula was developed. The second layer mystery deepens with the biological evidence. Fish in TVA reservoirs show mutation rates 400% higher than natural baseline, not from pollution but from exposure to what ichthyologists carefully term environmental pressures of unknown origin. The mutations aren't random but directed: gills that can process air, organs that detect electromagnetic fields, brain structures that shouldn't exist in fish. Medical records from communities along the reservoirs show similar patterns in humans. Children born with additional vertebrae, eyes that can perceive into the ultraviolet spectrum, neural configurations that process information at rates that shouldn't be possible. The CDC monitors these populations through Program 77, a medical surveillance initiative that officially doesn't exist but consumes $200 million annually in black budget allocations. The mapping of the drowned towns reveals they were nodes in a network that predated European colonization. Each community sat at the intersection of underground water flows, magnetic field anomalies, and acoustic convergence points, where sound waves from across the continent naturally concentrated. The Cherokee and earlier peoples built nothing at these locations, considering them doorways to other worlds that should remain closed. European settlers, lacking this knowledge, built towns that inadvertently activated these nodes, creating effects that, by the 1930s, threatened to become undeniable. The TVA dams didn't just flood towns, they created a water barrier between our reality and something else, using the mass and conductivity of water to maintain separation that was failing. The central paradox manifests in the timing. The TVA project launched in 1933 at the depth of the Great Depression when federal resources were supposedly exhausted. Yet the government found $2 billion, equivalent to $40 billion today, for dam construction, while breadlines formed in every city. The speed of implementation defied engineering logic. 7 major dams completed simultaneously using techniques and materials that contractors had never seen before. Workers reported that blueprints would change overnight, incorporating modifications that solved problems before they arose, as if someone with knowledge of the complete project was providing guidance from outside normal time. The concrete used in dam construction contained isotopes that shouldn't exist naturally, molecular structures that provided strength exceeding modern materials, suggesting access to technology beyond the 1930s. The structural mechanism of suppression involved every level of government. Local officials who questioned the removals found themselves under federal investigation for crimes they didn't commit. State legislators who opposed the project lost elections through voter irregularities that couldn't be proven. Federal judges who entertained lawsuits against the TVA were transferred to other circuits or retired under mysterious circumstances. The suppression wasn't just political but existential. Those who investigated too deeply experienced what psychologists termed reality displacement syndrome, a condition where memories of their own lives became uncertain, where they couldn't distinguish between what they had experienced and what they had been told they experienced. The condition was invariably fatal within 5 years. Deaths attributed to natural causes that forensic examination couldn't verify. The dual realities compared reveal 2 versions of Tennessee Valley history. In the official version, an impoverished region was transformed through technological progress into America's industrial heartland. In the suppressed version, an ancient network of sites that connected to something beyond human understanding was deliberately flooded to prevent activation of systems that would have revealed humanity's true origins and potential destiny. The residents weren't just relocated, they were scattered to break genetic lines that carried hereditary knowledge of these sites. The records weren't just destroyed, they were replaced with fabrications that established a false history. The towns weren't just flooded, they were erased from existence so thoroughly that questioning their loss seems like madness. The hypothesis forms through accumulated evidence. The TVA project was a containment operation disguised as economic development. Something in the Tennessee Valley threatened to emerge or activate in the 1930s, something that required immediate and massive intervention to suppress. The sites beneath the lakes aren't dead ruins, but active systems that still require constant management. The water isn't just covering them, it's conducting energy that keeps them dormant. The concrete pumped into underwater breaches isn't sealing cracks. It's maintaining barriers between dimensions. The entire TVA system is a massive containment grid, using hydroelectric generation as cover for its true purpose, keeping something ancient and powerful from awakening. Contradictory evidence surfaces in the form of lake phenomena that TVA security works to suppress. Boaters report areas where compass needles point down instead of north, where depth finders show structures that naval charts deny exist, where water forms standing waves without wind or current. Scuba divers describe encounters with passages that lead into air-filled chambers that shouldn't be possible below water level, chambers containing breathable atmosphere and functioning lights despite decades of submersion. Most disturbing are the sounds, harmonics that rise from the depths during certain astronomical alignments, frequencies that bypass the ears and resonate directly in consciousness, carrying information that the human mind isn't equipped to process. The global context emerges through classified United Nations documents leaked in 2011. The International Commission on Large Dams maintains a secret protocol called Submersion Directive 7, identifying 347 sites worldwide that require hydrological containment for species security. The TVA model has been replicated on every continent, always targeting locations with similar characteristics: ancient construction of unknown origin, geological anomalies that affect local space-time, populations with specific genetic markers. The coordination reveals that multiple governments know something about human history that public education deliberately conceals, something that requires massive infrastructure projects to keep suppressed. The dams aren't generating power, they're generating suppression fields that maintain consensus reality. The inner reflection reveals the psychological cost of living above drowned history. Residents of the Tennessee Valley report dreams of underwater cities that feel more real than waking life, inherited memories of places they've never seen, knowledge of events that supposedly never happened. Children draw pictures of buildings that match structures photographed before flooding, though the images were destroyed and the children were born decades after submersion. The collective unconscious of the region carries impressions of the drowned towns, creating a cognitive dissonance that manifests as depression, anxiety, and most commonly, a persistent feeling that reality itself is somehow wrong, that the world above the waterline is less real than what lies beneath. The climax arrives with the 2007 discovery during reservoir maintenance at Watauga Lake. When water levels dropped to unprecedented lows, workers found not just the ruins of Old Butler, but a structure beneath it, a perfect sphere 40 feet in diameter, made from a material that spectral analysis couldn't identify. The sphere emanated a field that caused electronic equipment to malfunction, mechanical watches to run backward, and most significantly, human consciousness to experience temporal displacement. Workers reported simultaneously experiencing past, present, and future, seeing the valley in states that spanned millions of years. The sphere was quickly resubmerged and the area permanently restricted, but not before one worker photographed symbols on its surface, symbols identical to those found in drowned sites worldwide, suggesting a connected network that the floods were meant to interrupt. The consequences cascade through modern infrastructure. Every TVA dam requires constant maintenance not for structural integrity but for containment integrity. Specialized teams monitor underwater sensors that track energies conventional physics doesn't recognize. Emergency protocols exist for substrate breaches that have nothing to do with dam failure but with preventing the emergence of things that water was meant to suppress. The entire electrical grid of the southeastern United States is configured not for optimal power distribution, but for maintaining frequencies that counteract harmonics rising from the flooded sites. What appears to be infrastructure is actually a containment system, and what appears to be lakes are actually liquid barriers between realities. Parallel evidence emerges from Native American oral traditions that predate European contact. Cherokee, Creek, and Chickasaw stories speak of the old ones who built in stone, who occupied the valley before human memory, who left doors that should not be opened in specific locations that match TVA reservoir sites. The traditions warn that water is the only barrier that can hold the singing stones that call to their creators, that breaking this barrier would result in the return of the Star Walkers and the end of human dominion. These stories were dismissed as mythology until acoustic analysis of reservoir beds detected exactly what the traditions described. Stones that emit complex frequencies that form mathematical patterns, frequencies that increase in intensity every year as if responding to something approaching. The return to the core question brings sorrow for the erased communities. Why did the TVA deliberately flood entire towns, destroying centuries of history and displacing millions of people? Not for hydroelectric power, which could have been generated without such extensive flooding. Not for flood control, which alternative engineering could have achieved. The towns were drowned because they sat atop evidence that humanity isn't what we believe ourselves to be, that our origins involve influences we're not prepared to acknowledge, that our future might involve the return of something that left markers of its inevitable return. The residents were scattered because their genetics carried memories that threatened to activate, their proximity to the sites causing evolutionary changes that couldn't be allowed to manifest. The temporal re-evaluation reveals the urgency of the 1930s intervention. Analysis of geological records shows that the sites beneath TVA lakes were approaching some kind of activation threshold, a cyclical awakening that occurs every several thousand years. The last activation corresponded with the global floods described in every cultural tradition. The next activation was calculated to occur between 1940 and 1950 if the sites remained exposed. The TVA project was a race against cosmic time implemented just before whatever lies beneath could fully awaken. The dams are temporary measures designed to last exactly as long as needed to bridge the dangerous period. TVA engineering documents show the dams have a planned obsolescence of 2033 to 2040, after which they will be decommissioned simultaneously for reasons that remain classified. The reconstruction of drowned history through fragments reveals communities that possess knowledge we've lost. The flooded towns weren't primitive settlements, but sophisticated communities with understanding of acoustics, geology, and consciousness that modern science is only beginning to rediscover. Their buildings were positioned to amplify natural earth frequencies. Their wells tapped into underground streams that carried more than water. Their ceremonies synchronized with cosmic cycles that affected local reality. This knowledge made them dangerous to the emerging industrial paradigm that required humanity to forget its true capabilities. The flooding wasn't just physical destruction, but metaphysical erasure, removing from human access the tools for transcendence that the sites provided. The true purpose unveils itself in the totality of evidence. The TVA project was designed to prevent human evolution from taking a path that certain forces deemed unacceptable. The sites beneath the lakes are activation points for dormant human capabilities, doorways to awareness that would fundamentally alter our species. The flooding keeps us trapped in a limited consciousness, preventing access to abilities that our ancestors knew, but we've been made to forget. Every drowned church, school, and cemetery represents not just lost history, but lost human potential. Capabilities that were sacrificed to maintain a reality that serves interests were not allowed to identify. The scientific analysis of water samples from TVA reservoirs reveals isotopic ratios that shouldn't exist, molecular structures that store and transmit information, essentially turning the entire lake system into a vast liquid computer, processing unknown calculations. The water isn't passive but active, programmed with frequencies that suppress certain brainwave patterns in nearby populations while enhancing others. This explains the documented TVA effect, statistically significant reductions in psychic phenomena, precognitive dreams, and anomalous experiences in populations near the reservoirs. The water is literally dampening human consciousness, keeping us operating within parameters that ensure we don't activate capabilities that the drowned sites would have awakened. The validation of authenticity comes from the convergence of impossible facts, the structures that shouldn't exist beneath the lakes, the genetic anomalies that shouldn't occur, the acoustic phenomena that shouldn't be possible, the coordinated global flooding of similar sites, all point to a deliberate campaign to suppress evidence of humanity's true nature. The continued classification of TVA documents after 90 years, the ongoing monitoring of reservoir populations, the massive black budget expenditures for substrate maintenance, all confirm that the threat isn't historical but active. Something beneath those waters still calls to us, and massive resources are still deployed to ensure we never answer. The motive for concealment transcends conventional conspiracy. If the public understood that entire towns were deliberately drowned to suppress evidence of non-human influence on human development, that our evolution is being artificially constrained, that we possess dormant capabilities that are being actively suppressed, the philosophical and social collapse would be absolute. Every assumption about human nature, potential, and destiny would require revision. The authorities don't just hide the drowned towns. They hide the evidence that humanity is in a prison of consciousness, that the bars are made of water and concrete, and that the jailers might not be human. The philosophical collapse arrives with the realization that we've been diminished, that the flooding of the Tennessee Valley was just one part of a global project to limit human awareness, to keep us from recognizing our true origins and potential. The residents of the drowned towns weren't just displaced. They were the last generation to have direct contact with the sites that connected humanity to its larger cosmic context. Their removal broke a chain of transmission that had lasted millennia, replacing lived knowledge with manufactured history. We're not who we think we are. We're not from where we think we're from, and we're not going where we think we're going, because the evidence that would tell us the truth lies beneath billions of gallons of water, in towns that no longer exist, guarded by forces that ensure we never remember what we've been made to forget. The closing echo resonates across every TVA reservoir, where the drowned bells of sunken churches still ring in frequencies only the unconscious can hear, calling the descendants of the displaced to remember what was lost. In drought years when the water recedes, the emerging structures stand as monuments to erased history, testimony to the price paid for a controlled reality. And in the depths where no light reaches, where pressure should have crushed everything to ruin, the ancient sites continue their patient wait, knowing that no dam lasts forever, that water eventually finds its way, that what was submerged will surface, and that humanity will eventually reclaim the inheritance that was drowned in the name of progress but in the service of suppression. The silent cities beneath the TVA lakes aren't dead but sleeping, and their dreams trouble the waters above them, sending ripples of remembrance through generations that were meant to forget, ensuring that someday, when the dams finally fail, we'll be ready to confront what emerges from the depths we were never meant to explore.